I am Daniel. This occurred in the summer of 2018, and I truly find it difficult to discuss this incident in a way that will keep me sounding sane, but I promise it is true. I was 19, employed at a part-time job in landscaping, and using almost all my free time to go camping with a group of guys I had been close to since middle school. We were all trying to make that summer special, knowing we were soon going to be separated by the demands of college, jobs, and other parts of life. So every weekend we would pile into a car and head for one of the many campgrounds scattered across this great state. Usually, it was harmless fun. Beer, dumb games, and half-cooked hot dogs over an open flame. I wouldn't call us outdoorsmen, but we certainly liked the idea of roughing it. The weekend destination was a place called Briar Lake. I had never heard of it. Neither had anyone else, but our de facto trip leader, Mitch, had found it online. It was a hidden gem, he said. No rangers, no fees, no real rules. Just pick a spot and pitch your tent. In retrospect, that probably should have been a red flag. We arrived just before nightfall. The way in was not easy. The road was mostly earth with deep ruts and no signs, which made it seem more like a trail for loggers than an entrance to a park. We saw only 2 other cars parked near the edge of the woods, both of which looked as if they had been deserted for a long time. One was covered in moss. I could understand that since the place had a very quiet, not the kind of quiet you hear in a place where people are supposed to be, where there are supposed to be birds and bugs. Our campsite was established perhaps 50 yards from the lake, adjacent to a dense wood. The trees, all too thick, leaned alarmingly far to the left, as if decades of wind had worked on them. The air, we were soon to find out, was rich with the odor of algae and ancient pine needles. No one would call it a beautiful spot or even a pleasant one, but we were here and we were going to stay here for the night. I remember setting up my tent and feeling as if we were under surveillance. No one specific, just the sort of weird sensation you get when you know you're being watched somewhere. And it's easy surveillance, like all the eyes in the world just happen to be open at the same time. We gathered around the fire that night, consuming inexpensive beer and spinning tales. Soon, one of the fellows, I believe it was Reggie, was compelled to drain his lizard and staggered off into the underbrush. We thought nothing of it until he failed to reappear. Initially, we were rollicking, making wisecracks about his possibly having plummeted into the lake or been gobbled up by raccoons. But after 10 minutes, then 20, we got serious. Mitch snagged a flashlight and started in with the calls for Reggie.
Reggie.
Still nothing. No amusing sounds of nature warming up to the sunset. No leaves being crunched by a returning Reggie. Only silence. We separated and looked for maybe an hour, hollering and flashing our lights around. Nothing. Just when we were going to give up and call in the search, Reggie walked out of the woods as if nothing had happened. He looked like death, sweaty, out of breath, and gasping like a fish out of water. When we asked where he had been all this time, he stared at us, incredulous, shook his head, and finally said,
"I was trying to find my way back."
But that was the thing, we hadn't gone anywhere. The fire was still roaring, and our campsite was just as it had been. There was no reason for Reggie to have gotten lost unless he'd gone too far out for comfort. After that, he wouldn't say much. He just curled up in his sleeping bag and stared at the tent wall. I thought maybe he'd had too much to drink. But around 3 a.m., I was pulled from a deep sleep by a sound. It was faint, but it was enough to rouse me. It sounded like whispering right outside my tent. At first, I thought it was one of the guys just being goofy. Then I realized it wasn't just one voice. It was 2, maybe 3, all speaking way too fast to understand. They sounded like the kind of whispers you hear in dreams. Wet, urgent, and way too close. I propped myself up and drew in my breath, concentrating on the sounds around me. And then I glimpsed a shadow slide past the mesh opening of my tent. It wasn't one of the guys. This thing was too tall, too thin, and didn't have the right gait to be human. It wasn't walking, it was sort of floating, as though its feet weren't touching the ground. I didn't move, I didn't even blink. I just sat there holding my breath for what felt like 10 minutes. Finally, the shadow glided into the trees, and I could exhale. The following morning, nobody mentioned anything about having seen or heard anything unusual, but Reggie was absent. His tent remained completely zipped as if he'd never emerged, but the camping gear inside was undisturbed, and the bag that had once kept him warm was empty. It had to be. How else to explain the boots that were missing from the place they should have been? And what was this doing here? A phone, face down in the ash of the fire pit. This was no way to treat a phone. We searched again everywhere. We even drove 10 miles out to the ranger station, but there was no one there. The door was locked, the windows boarded up. We next tried the sheriff's department, and while they did take the report, it was clear they didn't believe us. A couple of weeks later, they told us Reggie probably just wandered off and got lost. Maybe he drowned. But they never found a body. Talking about Briar Lake is no longer something any of us do. I don't even know if it still exists. I attempted to research it again just last year, and I couldn't find any trace of it. No maps, no listings, nothing. It's as if it was erased from existence. At times I question whether we all just imagined it, if it was some kind of collective dream that morphed into a nightmare. But then I remember that night. The shadow, the whispering. What I recall is too vivid for me to believe I imagined it. I still go camping, but never without cell service, and never anywhere that doesn't show up on Google Maps. Only last summer this occurred. Currently I am 42, and I am a married man with 2 young boys. Ethan, who is 9, and Caleb, who is 6. I work in logistics. My job is as boring as it sounds, but it pays the bills and keeps our life steady. A few years ago, my uncle died after a long, brutal illness. He left us his old beach house on the Oregon coast. I had never been there before. He had rented it out for years, and we weren't exactly close. The house is a weathered 2-story affair. Not much to look at, honestly. But the view. It sits right on a cliff, with a rickety wooden deck that juts out over the edge and a straight overlook of the Pacific. The lullaby became waves crashing beneath us. After we got it, we began summering there. At first we made short trips, then we elongated them. It was our family's little heaven, a place to elude the grind. The boys enjoyed it most, dashing about the craggy shore, crabbing and assembling fortifications of driftwood. I felt it like a gift from someone of whom I barely know. Last August we planned a full week there, arriving on a foggy Monday when the beach was empty and the air smelled of salt and damp wood. The initial days unfolded with unblemished perfection. Mornings steeped in lays, walks that spanned long and expanded into the shoreline. The laughter of our sons ricocheting off the cliffs and soaring into the atmosphere. By the time we reached Thursday night, however, things swung into an unfathomable realm I won't soon forget. It was close to 10 p.m. Our boys slept the untroubled sleep of those who have spent a day unfettered and wild. My wife Sarah and I occupied the deck, wrapped in blankets, and shared a cheap bottle of red wine, the ocean's restive churn our soundtrack. Ethan stumbled through the sliding door and out onto the deck. He thrilled my heart. I had not been certain until that moment that the deck was safe. "Dad, there's a noise in my room," he said, his voice small. "It sounds like someone scratching. It won't stop." Sarah looked at me, her brow furrowing. "Probably just the wind or maybe a branch against the house," she offered. But I could tell she wasn't convinced. I set my glass down, forcing a smile. "I'll check it out, buddy. Let's see what's spooking you." I told Sarah to stay put. No need for both of us to traipse through the chilly house. I figured it was nothing. An old house like this creaks and groans all the time. Ethan's room was downstairs off a narrow hallway that always felt a little too dark, even with the lights on. The boys had separate rooms, so I didn't bother waking Caleb. No point in 2 scared kids. Ethan took me to his room and gestured at the wall behind his bed. "It's there," he whispered, signaling me to be quiet. I stood motionless and listened. At first there was nothing, just the far-off sound of waves crashing. I was on the verge of convincing myself that Ethan's story was all in his head when I heard it. A faint, deliberate scratching, like nails being drawn across wood. There was nothing rhythmic about it. It would pause, then resume, almost as if it were thoughtful. I pressed my ear to the wall where Ethan indicated and sank to the floor. The sound sharpened into the kind of clarity that makes one question their sanity, an almost giggly clarity that demands a straitjacket. I bit my tongue. I recoiled. A sharp exclamation of "Holy hell!" escaped me before I could stop it. Ethan's eyes widened in tandem. We hadn't been quiet, hadn't hoped to be, but hadn't imagined that our sounds could be misconstrued as anything sinister. Then again, in a house where all manner of unspeakable things had taken place, who the hell knew? Still, a low guttural moan must surely be worse than anything we had done or could imagine. I grabbed Ethan's arm. He was still paralyzed with fear. I pulled him out of the room and he stumbled after me. I hissed, "We're getting Caleb, now." Then I ran down the hall, not looking back to see if Ethan followed. We bolted to Caleb's room. He was still asleep, curled up under his blanket. I didn't hesitate, just scooped him up. His little body went limp against my shoulder. My only thought, get back upstairs to Sarah, the deck, safety. Upon reaching the bottom of the stairs, I called out for her, my throat raw. "Sarah, get ready to go." That was when I heard it again, a scream ripped and raw that echoed from somewhere behind us and which was uncomfortably close. I spun around and there he was. If you could call him a man, he was one and only just. He staggered out from the shadows of the hallway. His clothes were rags and he was probably better off in them. They were caked with grime, and whatever he had on beneath them was no doubt odoriferous. His face was gaunt but not in a healthy way. It resembled a skull with skin stretched over it. His eyes, his eyes were the worst. They burned with a wild, unhinged look that promised anything but good. I almost dropped Caleb as I scrambled up the stairs, Ethan clinging to my shirt. We burst onto the deck and I slammed the sliding glass door shut behind us just as the man reached it. He hit the door with his full weight, and for a second I thought the impact would rattle the frame so hard that it would shatter. Sarah screamed. The sound was a burst of fear and surprise, and in its wake all I could hear was the frantic clawing of the man on the other side. His voice was rough and unhinged. "This is mine. You don't belong. Get out before I carve you up." I slammed my weight against the door, hollering for Sarah to gather the kids and call 911. She rounded them up, pulling them behind her like a grotesque human shield, fumbling for her phone with hands that looked perturbed. I fixed my stare on the man in the glass. His face was just a beard of inches away, separated only by a flimsy pane that felt like it should be covered in rubber and not glass. His breath fogged the pane, and his bared teeth looked more like a smile the way a rat would smile for all its trapped and tiny, sharp and dirty teeth. He was smearing something across the glass, and I was pretty sure that whatever it was something he had made. I don't know how long I held that door. I only know that it felt like forever, and that it was a long enough time for me to have a lot of different thoughts. At long last I heard sirens. The police had burst in from the side entrance of the house and were firing flashlight beams all about. 2 officers, tackling the man from behind, had ripped him away from the front door where he had been stopping all my attempts at exit, for which I now had to thank the side entrance cops. I was gasping for breath and leaning against the doorframe when my tormentor was finally vanquished. My sister Sarah seemed to have no more problem with me than the cops had had. I was no more in her way than I had been for the officers thrusting flashlight beams everywhere and storming in from the house's side. I was no less in her way than the Statue of Freedom had been in the way of overthrown cop. This resulted in a series of narrow channels between the walls with an exit just behind Ethan's bed. When they got inside, it was clear that someone had been living there for some time, evidently several months. There were empty food cans, taken from our own kitchen, crumpled blankets, and worst of all, crude drawings hastily scratched into the wood. They depicted a family, our family, whose likeness had been defaced with wild, angry strokes. A detective came in with some more information a few days later. The man's past was that of a drifter, known to the locals as unstable. Obsessed with the house after having worked odd jobs for my uncle years ago, he'd claimed my uncle had promised him the place, a delusion that festered when we showed up after years away. We'd been watched. He planned to scare us and do far worse than that, reclaim what he thought was his. We didn't return for the rest of summer. Trauma kept us away, not just fear. I hired a contractor to seal every inch of that crawl space, to board up any hidden nook I might have missed. We've gone back since, trying to reclaim the good memories, but it's not the same. Every creak, every shadow makes my heart race. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the waves are loud, I swear I hear faint scratching from somewhere deep in the walls. I tell myself it's just the wind, but I'm not sure I believe that anymore. I grew up in a small neighborhood where the houses were spaced far enough apart that you could scream at the top of your lungs, and maybe only one person would hear you. Maybe. It was the kind of place where kids ran around until dark without checking in. And summer break felt like some kind of dream. The air always smelled like warm grass and bug spray. The cicadas were loud enough to drown out your thoughts. I was 14 that summer, just old enough to stay out late without being treated like a little kid, but still young enough to feel like the world was mostly safe. There was this playground a few streets over. It wasn't much, just a rusty swing set, a single slide, and a sandbox that was more rocks than sand. But it was our spot. Every night, me and my best friend Caleb would ride our bikes there after dinner. We'd swing and talk and complain about how boring everything was. There was never anything to do, but somehow, those nights never felt boring. They felt infinite. Until the night I'm about to tell you about. It was mid-July, hot sticky air, the kind that clings to your skin even after the sun goes down. We met at the usual time, sometime around 9 o'clock. I remember Caleb had one of those blue freezer pops in his mouth when he pulled up. His lips were stained electric blue, and he kept trying to talk without spilling it. I remember that because it was the last normal thing I saw that night. We hung out for a while, just swinging back and forth, talking about nothing. He told me about this girl he had a crush on. I teased him for it. The sun had dipped behind the trees and the sky was turning that deep purple that only ever shows up in July. That's when we saw someone walk by. It was just a person at first. Looked like a man. Tall, walking slow along the edge of the park. Nothing too weird about that, except there wasn't really a path there. It was just grass and trees. And the way he moved, it was like he didn't know where he was going. Or didn't care. His arms hung strangely, kind of stiff, like he wasn't fully in control of them. We stopped talking. Just watched. He never looked at us. Just kept moving along the tree line until he disappeared behind the slide. We waited for him to come out the other side. He didn't. We waited almost a full minute. Still nothing. I looked at Caleb. He looked back at me. I could tell he was trying to act unbothered, but I know him too well. He was freaked out, so was I. I told him to forget it. Maybe the guy turned around or ducked into the trees. We kept swinging. Not even 2 minutes later, the guy walked past again. From the same direction, same weird stiff arms, same slow gait. Still didn't look at us. That's when I started to feel cold. Not a metaphorical cold, I mean an actual cold breeze that hit me like a slap. It made me stop swinging and grip the chains. Caleb noticed too. He asked if I felt it. I nodded, then he asked if I wanted to leave. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem scared. Maybe I was trying to convince myself we were just being paranoid. We stayed. That was the wrong decision. The man passed by a third time, only this time he stopped. He turned, slowly, and looked directly at us. There was something wrong with his face. I know that sounds cliché, but I mean it literally. It didn't look finished, like someone tried to sculpt a face from memory but gave up halfway through. I couldn't tell if he had eyes, his mouth wasn't shaped right, and then he started walking toward us. I didn't scream, I couldn't. Caleb grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise. We both just froze. The man, or whatever he was, crossed the grass without making a sound. His feet didn't seem to press into the ground at all. I don't even know if they touched the ground. When he got within maybe 10 feet of us, the swing I was sitting on jerked violently, like someone pushed it from behind, hard. I flew forward, hit the ground, scraped my elbow. When I turned to look behind me, no one was there, but the swing next to me, the one Caleb had just been on, it was empty. I stood up and spun around. Caleb was nowhere. Gone. Just like that. Not a sound, not a shout, just missing. I screamed his name over and over. Checked the slide, the trees, behind the bathroom building. Nothing. The man was gone too. The park felt wrong, the air too still, the shadows too deep. I left my bike and ran home so fast my lungs felt like they were on fire. I couldn't stop crying. My parents thought I was having some kind of panic attack. They called Caleb's house. His mom picked up and said he hadn't come home yet. I told them everything. They didn't believe me, not until the police got involved. They found Caleb's bike still leaning against the swing set. Found his backpack too, but no sign of him. Not a single clue. He was never found. The park got torn down the next summer. Something about safety violations. It's just an empty lot now, filled with tall grass and trash. But sometimes, especially in July, I swear I hear the sound of metal chains creaking, like a swing moving slowly back and forth. And I still don't go near that lot after dark.